folks. Welcome to this week's Ag Report. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about the weather that we've been having, a little bit about the Ellis County crop. We have Scott Boren joining us today. He is a longtime Ellis County farmer, a cotton producer. He's also on the Texas Wheat Producers Board, and he is the president of the Ellis County Farm Bureau. I appreciate you taking time to join with us today, Scott.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
So, folks, as they drive around the county, they've probably seen planters running, and they probably have some fields that they remember, typically there's cotton grown in, and they've seen a planter run through that field. Maybe they've even seen a little of that cotton coming up, but then it kind of disappeared, or maybe they've seen a planter running a second time and they were kind of, why are they planting that again? So Scott, kind of share with us a little bit about, what they're seeing out there.
Well, we started off this year. Let me just back up and say, cotton almost always gets planted because for one reason, it's the last crop to get planted. And so, maybe too wet, you miss the corn window, you may miss the milo window. Well, then the last thing that's left is cotton, and usually it's warmer. Somewhere along the way it dries up, and enough to get cotton planted. And you just have a pretty big window because really anywhere from say the 1st of April till I think the planting deadline, unless I've changed it, has always been May 31st. So you got 2 months to get to get it up and get it going. So because of that, that's the only crop I've had every single year the 30 years that I've farmed, so it's a tough crop to get going though. And so a lot of people got their cotton planted first week of April. The ground was a little dry. And so some people, some of the seeds hit some moisture, some didn't. And, they were just hoping for a little shower to bring the rest of it up, maybe half an inch or something. And they actually, when most people finished planting or got a lot of it planted there the first week of April, they were calling for maybe a half an inch or something. I think everybody that had corn or wheat was hoping for more because it was a little dry. And well, we got about 3 inches. And so and then it turned, we got that frost and it turned cold. And so most of the cotton just didn't come up, which is not necessarily unusual. I mean, most people, when they finish planting their cotton, you say, hey, did you finish planting your cotton? Yeah, the first time. It's kind of a given that a lot of years you're going to have to plant something over, either part of a field or several fields or sometimes the whole thing, and so a lot of that cotton just didn't come up. The stuff that did come up, it was just sick because it had just been so cool, wet, cloudy, and just, didn't look healthy. And, but there has been little opportunity to replant it since, that first week of April, because nearly every week we've gotten a 2 or 3 inch rain, it seems like. I know right here in Ferris, I've gotten about 13 and a half inches in the last maybe 5 weeks, so there's probably been a day here and a day there. And I know some people did replant some, but most people didn't do it, including myself, because you figure they're calling for another 2 or 3 inch rain. I could replant it today, but it's just going to get ruined again. And so, some cotton probably hadn't even been planted the first time. I've seen some fields that have never even been planted. And then, I haven't really seen a field that's up to a good stand anywhere. So they're very, very unusual for this late in May for there not to be some cotton somewhere.
Right. And this is a hard thing for the producers, because like you say, it's the last opportunity to get a crop in. And as we have, explained many times, the margins are very tight. And so when you might make a little something on your wheat crop or your corn crop, but if you've spent money on cotton and you've got your fertilizer out, but you have no crop left, then that kind of really eats into a potential profit that year on there. And cotton was it was a mainstay here for many years. It's what built Ellis County. For those of y'all that have moved in, the crepe myrtle didn't build Ellis County. It was cotton. That's what built the infrastructure here. It's what built many businesses, cotton gins, textile mills, feed mills, cottonseed cake mills, all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of these buildings and structures you see around, they tie back to that. And I know it's still important for producers, like yourself on there. So, what kind of, the date is coming up quick, the deadline. Usually there's, some late planning, dates you can extend a little bit, but, we all know that that's not necessarily the best option. There's deadlines for a reason, because usually there's not that much chance to make a crop. You're going to be concerned about getting an early frost on the back end and not finishing out.
Yeah. So the planting deadline, unless they've changed it, is normally the May 31st. And so at that point, if you have planted the cotton and you can't replant it before May 31st, then you can collect the full insurance payment, which nobody wants to do, especially in a year where cotton prices are good. Everybody wanted to make a good cotton crop, and so there's usually a 10-day, 2-week replanting period, that's extended planting period that goes after that. But every day they reduce the amount they'll guarantee. And, the reality is June planted cotton doesn't have a very good chance of making a good yield. And there's a reason for that, because usually by the time it gets going, it's been wet, it'll get started pretty good. But usually the hot weather shows up at some point, in the wrong time of its development. If you don't get rains all through July and August, it isn't gonna be any good. And then the other problem you run into is that you're going to end up harvesting in October, which is the second wettest month of the year, and days are starting to get shorter and get cooler, and it becomes a real challenge a lot of times to get it out. So I've done it before, planted it right there at the end or in June, and then you're down there in October struggling in the mud trying to get a mediocre crop out. So it might be better just to take the insurance and move on. And then if you never got it planted, then you're only going to get, if you never even got it planted one time, you're just going to get the prevented planting payment, which is not nearly as good. And so the options just aren't very, very good. And so, most people, especially if they saved acres for cotton, they're probably thinking, wow, we should have planted corn on them earlier, because the cotton thing is not working out this year. And, you were talking about the cotton in Ellis County. People have told me that every field and if you see a pasture without trees, or you see them with terraces in them, every field was in cotton.
That's right.
Might have been a field or two they raised some corn or something on for their mules, to raise the cotton. But the whole county was planted in cotton. I'd like to see that. It would look totally different. We got a lot of trees growing now, probably where they had cotton in the past, and so along the way they gave up the least productive fields, and so now in Ellis County we're just farming what's left, the most productive fields they had back then. Plus now we have a lot of other crops people are growing. So cotton is still an important crop in Ellis County, and it's important to still to a lot of businesses. And so not having any this year is going to be hard on cotton gins and other people that depend on some cotton coming in.
You talk about those fields being all cotton. I remember growing up, a lot of those fields, and especially west of 35, the old men had to remember the spots in the field where there was alkali poisoning. We talk about rain, talk about those rains, but they didn't want to rain around July the 4th, because they'd dye that cotton if they had alkali spots in those fields. Now you get over towards Ferris, wasn't quite as bad, but you got around 5 Points and it was pretty prevalent.
Oh yeah. And even over here, there's certain spots or fields that I will just not plant in cotton, because they called it the alkali back in the back in the day, but it's cotton root rot. It's what it is. So it's and it affects some other plants too. But cotton, it's a fungus that's in the ground. Doesn't really move. Doesn't really change the area that it's in. But I've got certain fields that you learn pretty quick. Don't plant cotton there, because either it'll just die and never make any cotton, or it'll make cotton and then die, and the stalks will just break off at the ground. And so when you start trying to strip it, you can just wad your cotton stripper up with stalks. And I mean, it can be a terrible ordeal trying to get through it. And a lot of times you just have to abandon parts of it. So you learn pretty quick which fields to just don't put cotton there. I've got several that, and it's funny because right across the road, it's not a problem, but boy, you better not put it on that one.
Yeah.
The cotton is a tough crop to get going. It's a tough plant. Once it gets going, it's tough. You can run over it.
Pretty woody.
It's woody. And if you get them too far apart, they will turn into a tree, and you can't even get your cotton stripper through there. So that's a lot of times when you have a year like this, people may end up with kind of a partial stand. And so if you end up with, only a third of the plants you need out there, you can't even strip it, because, the stalk may get 1.5 inches. I've seen some that are 2-3 inches at the base, like a tree. Well, your cotton stripper, and it's got big branches coming out of the bottom of it, and it just hangs in your cotton stripper, pulls it up out of the ground, and there's good cotton on it, but you can't get it, And so we got to keep them closer together to where it doesn't, it's kind of a little, thick pencil,
Right.
size, and you can get the stripper through there. But the cotton is really hard to get up out of the ground. And, I think one of the reasons for that is, it's relative to the size of the seedling. The seed is not all that big. And some of the newer varieties, have small seed, because that has some benefit, on the lint production end. If you have a lot of the lint, the fibers come off of the seed. And so, the more seeds you have, if you have a bunch of little seeds, well, it might produce more fiber, and so a lot of these varieties tend to kind of have smaller seed now, which makes it harder to get up and get started than some big fat seed. But, so until when the seedling germinates, it's everybody's growing a little bean plant somewhere along and they're growing up. It's kind of a plant like that. It's going to put out 2 seed leaves from the 2 halves of the, from the seed, and, I liken that to a solar panel, until it can get the solar panel up and out of the ground and open above the ground where it can collect some sunlight and get some energy for the plant. Well, all it's got to operate off of is the battery, the seed that's under the ground. And so when it's wet and saturated, the seedling growth just stops where it is. So the more days it stays wet and saturated, it's just sitting there, but it's using the energy of the seed up. And when it's sitting there under the ground, not moving on through to get up, fungi and other pathogens start to attack it. And so it won't come up while it's muddy. It's got to be dry to come up, and it's got to be dry for a long enough period. So once it gets wet and just stays muddy, you're not going to get it up out of the ground. It's going to just die under the ground, and it's going to have energy from the seed, and you're going to be replanting.
How ironic is it? We may have some guys tuning in from the 1950s, and they would soak that seed in buckets overnight in water before they planted it the next day because it was so dry. The irony, we got too much water, and those guys in those days, they were having to add water to try and get that up. So Scott, I appreciate the insight that you brought in. Love the analogy of the solar panel and the battery. That's a great mental picture for folks to see kind of what's going on in the fields, and great explanation of there folks driving around, they're looking out their windows, and they're kind of wondering where things are and why it hadn't come up or why it disappeared. They may have seen little things popping up, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And where'd they go? So really appreciate it.
wet.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, and hope you all have enjoyed this ag report on Ellis County cotton, and the good, the bad, sometime the very wet. So y'all take care now.